also seeing nearly 2,000 Palestinians who had been continue to follow up on one of the biggest conversations of the week. If you were with us yesterday, you heard me talk about Secretary of State Marco Rubio's comments that it was one of the most important days for world peace in 50 years, yesterday being that day, seeing the ceasefire deal in its first phase and over in the Middle East between Israelis getting 20 of their hostages back, and also seeing nearly 2,000 Palestinians who had been held prisoner in Israel being returned back to their people as well. So I want to bring in CARE Chicago Executive Director Ahmed Rehab to speak a little bit more about the history that was made. And thank you for your time. I want to say that first and foremost.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be on.
I certainly appreciate you. I like to have the whole story when we're able to tell it. Yesterday, we brought on the Consul General of Israel to the Midwest and spoke to him. So it's really important that we hear your voice today. And I want to start with the very same aspect of things that I asked him yesterday, and that is your reaction to the developments and the press conferences that we saw play out throughout the day.
Well, to start off with, we're pleased that there's a ceasefire finally in place. We've been asking at the top of our lungs for this for close to 2 years, over 2 years now. But the second thing to say is that while we're happy that the killings have stopped, that this isn't the end of the story. There needs to be accountability. At the end of the Holocaust, we didn't all just walk away and shake hands with Germany. There had to be Nuremberg. And so there has to be the Hague War Crimes Tribunals. And everybody who was involved in the murder, mass murder of 67,000 civilians, including 20,000 children, needs to be held accountable per international law, including the presidents of the United States, Joe Biden and Donald Trump, who at the Knesset boasted about giving weapons to Netanyahu to use on the Gazans, and quote unquote, he said he used them well. That's an admission of guilt and complicity in the said genocide in Gaza. So it's not the end of the story as far as we're concerned. Furthermore, there has to be an end to occupation, apartheid, and there needs to be a Palestinian state. So up until we get to that point, what we have now is just a first step, and certainly nothing to celebrate as being the end of the story, or in the headlines, peace has been resolved and brought in. It's just the beginning.
It's certainly a first step, a huge one, though, that you had been working on, even in your own admission, for quite some time, that these two nations had been working on for quite some time. But I can sense in your voice, and even in speaking with the Consul General yesterday, that there's a lot more that still needs to be waded through in terms of a ceasefire actually holding. What is your feeling at this point that it can hold? We have seen, days of peace before, but how do you think we actually maintain a ceasefire deal for years to come?
I think the root causes of this problem need to be addressed and resolved. When President Trump cynically states that we've had peace for the first time in 3,000 years, it really underscores that he understands very little about this problem in the Middle East. It didn't start on October 7th. It started in the 1940s, 47, 48, when the State of Israel was unilaterally announced and they declared independence from the British. And at that point, there was a mass displacement of Palestinians and uprooting from their ancestral homeland, and it kept on going. Now the West Bank itself has hundreds of thousands of illegal settlers there. They're completely backed by the Israeli state, and they're violent, and they're targeting civilians. We've seen what happened in Gaza, the genocide, but before that, it was the largest open prison in the world. And so the future remains dire unless these root causes are addressed, and there can only be peace if the humanity of Palestinians is acknowledged, and the right to self-determination, and the right to dignity, life, and prosperity, along with the Israelis. We cannot only see the humanity of one side. The rhetoric has talked about Israeli families, but not Palestinian families. It's talked about the hostages, as in the Israeli hostages held in Gaza, but not the Palestinian hostages in tens of thousands held in Israel. And so we cannot continue in this lopsided type of approach to the problem and expect it to be resolved just because we have the might and we have the weapons.
And I did mention as we open this segment both the Israeli hostages, but also nearly 2,000 Palestinians who had been held as well. As I was coming to you, in acknowledgement of both. You know, you were pretty critical of President Trump, but there were others who spoke, other world leaders from around the Middle East who were singing his praises for much of the day yesterday. How did you feel about that?
It was cringe, to say the least. And we understand the dynamics of, a powerful nation and its powerful president, sort of flexing their muscle in weaker regions of the world. And you see this also vis-a-vis the dynamics in Europe and South America and even in Asia, certainly the Middle East. It's embarrassing. And there is also complicity on the side of Arab leaders as far as not having done enough to prevent this genocide from continuing. Being able to bring in very needed humanitarian aid over those 2 years. This is a man-made problem. It shouldn't have happened. It could have been stopped. Tens of thousands of lives could have been saved. The only reason why we didn't see that happening is because there was no political will, and where there was will, there was no competency or power to make it happen. And so these tens of thousands of individuals, including 20,000 children, have been murdered in cold blood in ways that shouldn't have happened. This wasn't about self-defense. This was about mass punishment, which is illegal under international law. And for the most part, the world watched as it happened live on our, phone screens and television screens. And it's very, very sad.
It is very sad what we have seen take place over the last 2 years, and so many lives have been affected by it. Let me ask you this. So there is the 20 Israeli hostages who were freed, but they were also hoping that more than the 4 bodies of hostages who passed away during their time in captivity would be delivered as well as a part of this agreement. And that, there's this hard line between the people of Palestine versus Hamas. And there are people who would say the issue isn't just a lack of political will, but Hamas using their own people as shields. What are your thoughts on that, and how they can get the rest of these bodies back to the families so that they can be, have some dignity in burial?
This whole human shields language is part of the language of dehumanization. That is set forth into the world by the Israeli propaganda machine that we call the Hasbara, propaganda. And it's part of the reason why they were able to get away with this genocide, is that they managed, for the most part, for a great part, to dehumanize Palestinians, suggesting that their mothers are not normal mothers, their fathers are not normal fathers, that they put their children up as human shields for attention. What attention, I don't know. No attention ever came. No salvation ever came. It all makes no sense. And the other problem is that you're saying there's sort of a line between the Palestinian people and Hamas. Well, there isn't one between the Israeli people and their government. They elected their government. They voted for their government. It's a democratically, quote unquote, elected government. And so this genocide, sadly, doesn't only bring into question the government itself, but the entire Israeli society that backed this government in this genocide as it played out live. And bar a minority of Israelis, and this has to be said to give credit where credit is due, that were very loud and very defiant against this genocide, sometimes to their personal detriment. For the most part, Israeli society, the religious establishment, the political establishment, the media establishment, really supported this heinous mass punishment of Gazans that amounted to genocide and ethnic cleansing. And so there's a large question right now for me and for many Americans, including Jewish Americans, about the future of Israeli society with that sort of massive burden weighing on their legacy moving forward, and whether they can ever be normalized again in international community.
Well, certainly, as this entire situation has played out, I do think we've all seen the Israeli government come under more and more pressure to make a move such as what's taken place now. There were people in the streets that were protesting against some of their occupation and what was taking place. Again, the longer this drew out, these 2 years that we've gone from October 7th of 2023, there is the discussion now as to whether rebuilding Gaza or this two-state government, which one should be the priority for the immediate future? Where do you stand on that?
So I'm a human rights activist and advocate, and my concern has been the genocide and the ethnic cleansing. As far as the political conversation, my response to that is I fall back on the Palestinians and point to their right to self-determination. And that's their call and their negotiation. So I don't, spend too much time myself proposing solutions politically. But what I do know is that these human rights violations that have happened, there has to be accountability for them. And to make it very simple to understand for your viewers, imagine if it were in the reverse. Imagine if it were Palestinians who decimated 80% of Israel and killed 67,000 Israelis, innocent Israelis, and 20,000 Israeli children. Imagine if the conversation would be so technocratic and bureaucratic at this point in time. Certainly it wouldn't be. And so that double standard is something we have to confront. And I understand there's power and no power. There's the haves and the have-nots, and that's just the way the world works. But those of us who believe in the inherent right to all humans to dignity, to accountability for them. And to make it very simple to understand for your viewers, imagine if it were in the reverse. Imagine if it were Palestinians who decimated 80% of Israel and killed 67,000 Israelis, innocent Israelis, and 20,000 Israeli children. Imagine if the conversation would be so technocratic and bureaucratic at this point in time. Certainly it wouldn't be. And so that double standard is something we have to confront. And I understand there's power and no power. There's the haves and the have-nots, and that's just the way the world works. But those of us who believe in the inherent right to all humans to dignity, to life, to justice, cannot stand for that. And we must keep, pushing back on that narrative and the attempt to normalize this heinous, evil act that happened over 2 years. It will go down in history as an act of evil. And in this moment, I want to register my voice on the side of those who see it as such and who call it out as such.
Ahmed, Rehab with the Council on American Islamic Relations. I appreciate your time and your conversation.
Thank you very much for having me.
You take care.